call the July 15th Select Board meeting to order. We are using a Zoom webinar for our meetings, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of the Nantucket Government TV YouTube live feed for the meeting. People registering to be an attendee must use their names, otherwise they will not be allowed to participate in the discussion. Attendees will join in listening mode. They can click the raise hand button if they wish to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hands in the order in which they were raised. If you do not have an audio capable device, you can either use the Q&A button or you can use a call-in. We will no longer be using the YouTube chat. Any questions that cannot be verbally asked must use the Q&A function, or like I said, the call-in. All questions should be directed through the chair. I will now confirm member access and those who are participating in the meeting. I'll start with the select board members in the order in which I see you. Melissa Murphy, can you hear me?
Here, yes.
Jason Bridges.
Present.
Christy Ferrantella.
Here.
Matt Fee will be a few minutes late, so he'll be jumping in later. And then I will confirm this staff members who are present. Erica Mooney.
Present.
Amy Baxter.
Here.
Libby Gibson.
Present.
Brian Turbot.
Present.
Roberto Santamaria.
Present.
Janet Schulte.
Present.
And we have other people who will be participating in the meeting tonight. We have our state rep, Dylan Fernandez, is here.
Hey guys.
We have Nancy Holmes, our town clerk.
Present.
We have Brooke Moore. Oh, I think you just said something, but you're muted. Charity Grace.
I'm here.
Hi, thanks, Brooke.
Present.
Marita Scarlett.
Present.
John Giorgio, Town Council.
Present.
Mary Longacre.
Good evening.
Theron Singleton. Can you hear me? You can hear me? You're muted.
Here.
Hi. And then we do have Chuck Larson here as well.
Good evening.
Hi, Chuck.
Hi.
I think I covered everyone on the screen. The open meeting of the Select Board is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings. And as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded to the public so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. We do also allow public participation as outlined previously using Zoom webinar. All of our meeting materials can be found on the town's website in our select board packet. As we go through the items on the agenda, the chair will recognize the appropriate people to speak. And if anyone has a question or a comment, please raise your hand and wait to be recognized. We will be taking all votes via roll call. And please remember to mute your computer when you're not speaking, and to speak clearly for accurate minutes, and to avoid sharing your screen as it will be captured by the recording unless you specifically want to do so for an agenda item. With that, I will turn to the agenda. I believe the only addition we have is that Dylan has come on to give us an update in regard to the Steamship funding. So I will go to Dylan first.
Hi, thank you guys. Really great to see everyone. And this is the longest I've been away from Nantucket in 4 years. So hopefully we'll be able to get back relatively soon. So just know you guys are really busy. Wanted just to give a quick update. And this just kind of follows upon previous discussions we've had on this forum in the past. So as has been widely reported, and as we've all talked about, the steamship has been facing some really steep financial deficits due to COVID. They're a fare box driven transportation entity. In that regard, they're unique in the Commonwealth and really in the country. And so that makes them particularly vulnerable to COVID. So, based on the Enabling Act, if the steamship is not whole by the end of the year, then the state treasurer has to step in and make them whole. And then the treasurer likely would assess the port communities based on their percentage laid out in the Enabling Act, Nantucket 35, the Vineyard 35, and then the three port towns each would be assessed for 10% each. That we viewed and on this forum very early on, I think Senator Sear and I both expressed that we viewed that as not acceptable, and frankly, something that our towns really could not shoulder, and especially during COVID. And so, we started early conversations between the Steamship Authority and Administration and Finance and Massachusetts Department of Transportation. And through those kind of conversations, Senator Sear filed in the Senate bill an amendment to make it so that the port communities are not on the hook for deficits. And through his really strong leadership in the Senate, he was able to get that passed on the Senate. And then it came as the legislation was being consolidated between the two bodies, House and Senate. We weighed in heavily from our end and put a sign-on letter together from all the House members, about 10 or so from the various port communities, and very excited to say that was included in the final piece of the bill, which we hope will be enacted as soon as tomorrow. There is no reason in my mind why the governor would veto something like this, and I don't at all anticipate that. But with anything legislatively, it's not done until it's finally done. But we feel really, really hopeful, and we've made a ton of progress. And my hat's off to Senator Sear as well for making a tremendous effort on this. Certainly a team effort. But this, the projections have ranged quite a bit since COVID started. I remember at the beginning, the steamship was announcing up to a $65, $70 million deficit as one of the worst case scenarios. Right now, we're looking around 20 million. And so Nantucket being on the hook for 35% of that, somewhere around 7 million, after you guys have already gone through probably one of the toughest budgets in decades, that just puts you in an untenable situation. So thrilled that piece got done, and thrilled to be able to save the island millions of dollars. And this was about we need to keep the steamship afloat to keep the boats running and preserve that critical lifeline, but we also need to keep the towns afloat, especially Nantucket and the other port communities. So this goes a long way to doing that. So that's on the steamship issue. Just want to give a quick update there. And then on the on a significantly less significant note, we did pass the Nantucket water merger bill. So that was just, it seems even odd to talk about after talking about saving millions of dollars, talk about the Nantucket water merger bill, but that was passed as well. That was something that's almost 4 years in the making. And the bill name is an act to supply Nantucket's inhabitants with water. So we always get some chuckles people at the State House are like, so they don't have water? But anyway, great bill name, and we were able to pass it. That now will go to the Senate, which will be passed in good time, and we'll wrap that piece up in the next couple of months here as well. So that's all I got. Happy to chat more, but I know you guys have a really tight time frame. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Does anybody have any questions?
Just you.
Oh, sorry. Then you, Jason.
Hi, Dylan. I'm Amy Baxter. I'm the licensing administrator. And while I have you, I just had 2 questions regarding restaurants and some bills I think had been in the legislature. Julian had tweeted yesterday that it was approved that it was going to allow restaurants to continue to sell alcohol as they have been with to-go orders as long as the pandemic is on. I wanted to confirm that and then find out if anything went with the cocktails for the Commonwealth bill. I've been asked about that a lot as far as adding liquor to that policy. If you have updates on those 2 things.
Yeah, so on the first one, my understanding is that that is going to be extended. On the second piece, I'll have to come back to you, and Tom, I think, is on here. We can both circle back with you on exactly what the status is of the cocktails for the Commonwealth. Yeah. But hey, these are important things. No, I hear you.
Yeah, I know it had gone through the House. Yeah, it had gone through the House, I believe, and then it kind of stuck there. And I told everyone I didn't think it went through, so we just wanted to follow up.
The House passed this a considerable time ago, but I'm honestly, I am not sure what our Senate counterparts have done. And actually, part of the bill that we passed, some sections of it were the governor just issued orders enacting parts of the legislation. So I'll have to double check on exactly where it's at with the cocktails. Thanks.
All good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Amy.
Jason?
I was just saying thank you to Dylan and Julian for putting the work in. It's, exactly everything you said, Dylan, it's very important for us not to be on the hook on another million, let alone 7 or 10. And so that's a big deal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to come on tonight.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for your leadership as well. Your work really informs and inspires what we do. So, I think you guys have a ton to be, we look to you for support and guidance, and certainly get it very regularly. And Nantucket has a lot to be proud about in terms of how they've handled COVID. So thank you for all your work. Have a good night, guys. Great to chat.
Bye. Next, I'll move on to announcements, and I'll turn it over to the town manager for an update on the census.
Okay, so the census. I'm just going to read a little bit from an email that I got today from our census coordinator. Over the last week, Nantucket's overall census response rate has begun to lag behind Martha's Vineyard. That gives us the distinction, not a good one, of being in last place among Massachusetts counties. As of today, 26% of Nantucket households have completed the census. On the Vineyard, the rate is 26.6, so they're not that much better, but they are a little better. The installation of lawn signs in English, Spanish, and Portuguese explicitly explaining the impact of the census has begun. In addition to listing the language-appropriate websites and phone numbers, they say, take the census, feed a family. Take the census, pay a teacher. Take the census, fund health clinics. Take the census, fill a pothole. And taking it doesn't hurt, but not taking it can. Federal funding for these and other programs are at stake. So, and we're grateful to the 40 or so homeowners and businesses that have volunteered to post the lawn signs on a rotating basis over the next few months. Census takers are going to start going door to door in August to households that have not responded on their own. You can avoid that by completing the census now. Also, there's a Facebook challenge with a chance to win a $100 Stop and Shop gift card each Friday, starting this week and going through August 14th. Visit the town's Facebook page for details on this in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Thank you.
Thank you. And the meeting's being audio and video recorded. COVID-19 weekly update. Are there any opening comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, I will turn it over to Roberto Santamaria, our Public Health Director.
Hello there. So let me quickly, as always, share the screen. And here we go. Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me again. I'll just jump right in to the same overview that we were having yesterday or last week, just about the mask order and how we passed it and how people are actually starting to pay attention. It's been going well. We have our COVID educators out there and people are starting to pay attention, and we're seeing much more mask compliance than we've seen before. So real quick, just going to go over our testing numbers from this morning. We had 2,500, a little bit over 2,500 people tested already of the 100K that the town gave us, that the town gave the hospital for the PCR testing. 190 have been tested on that grant. Private employers have paid for 296 tests, and 307 tests were actually self-paid. Right now, the hospital is regularly testing around 80 to 100 people per day. So it's been pretty great. As of this morning, we had 29 cases, of which 27 of them were caught off island and brought here. In the two new most recent cases are no different. And the fact that we hadn't seen a huge surge in the last 3 days says a lot. The incubation period for COVID is anywhere between 7 and 10 days. We are now 11 days out after the 4th. So that is saying a lot. We should have had a lot more. If people weren't paying attention, we would have had a downright spike, and people were really paying attention to the masks over that weekend. Even though we did have to enforce it, it is effective. The masks were effective. The 2 new cases were actually people who weren't here during the 4th of July. So that's good. That's also really good to know. So a quick overview of the cases, of the metrics, I mean. We're still showing green across the board in our metrics. So I'll go real quick one by one in our metrics number. So the first line, which is keeping the number below 10%, we're still currently only at around 1% of a positive test rate. The second one is keeping it below 5. If you remember last week, metric 2 was at 3.7. It's currently now at 3.4. And that's, once again, it's a relic of small numbers. Don't panic on that. It's just that it's 1 out of 29. If you remember last week, the 0.39% was actually 0.05 last week. So as we move forward, the more people we test, those numbers do shrink. So we're still doing very well. The number of patients in the hospital, we still have 0. We did have to transfer somebody off island that is expected to be positive. So we're trying to get information on that as we move along and do contact tracing there. As far as the readiness goes and the capacity and the tracing, still have a solid yes on our capabilities there and our readiness there. And we will be moving forward with conversations with the hospital. Now, number 7, which is the one we discussed adding last week, which was the sewer predictive incidence, which in my opinion, we should keep below 5%, mainly because of the way the spikes work. They are using it under millions of gallons per day. So currently that incidence projected rate is 0.65% based on the July 5th sample. So I'll go deeper into that right now. So the sewer predictive incidence shows the amount of viral shedding that is within the sewer coming over that course of the 24-hour period. They are sampling over that whole day. So you'll see where it says concentration per liter is something like 10,000 copies. Well, yes, 10,000 copies, but that gets standardized to an actual number. This July 5th number came out to a predictive number of 110. So they predicted that there were possibly 110 symptomatic and asymptomatic people here on the island on July 5th. So we need to actually dissect that number a little bit. And in order to dissect that number, I kind of have to go through a few pros and cons of the sewer metrics first. So the pros is the good thing about the sewers is it gives us over a week's advance notice of the disease fluctuation. Viral shedding starts about 2 to 4 days after the infection, but up to 7 days before symptoms. And it's a big representative sample of the population between the septic flow that is being brought from the pumpers to the sewage treatment plant, as well as all the sewage that's going into the treatment plant. We predict between 50 to 70% of the population is being captured in these samples. And it captures more than just the people presenting at the testing center, which what you see here says is eliminates selection bias. Selection bias is actually the people who tend to self-select to go in and pay and do PCR testing tend to be a healthier population. If you are actively seeking to do preventative work, for yourself to make sure how you feel, things like that, that population that self-selects to be tested usually tends to be healthier than your average population. The sewer metric, the sewer actually captures everyone and eliminates that selection bias. And also PCR testing is expensive. It's $150 per person. With this being $1,200 per sample, it actually saves a lot of money because we're looking at a population as a whole. So to dissect the number even further, we go into cons. The margin of error increases the smaller the population. So just like with the mortality rate that I mentioned with metric 2, the sample population that shows up, those sample case numbers that you see show up at around, in the July 5th, it's at 110. But that's using a population of about 16,500 people, which they got off of the census numbers for this time period. But it doesn't take into account any sort of dynamic population. A dynamic population is populations that have people moving in and out throughout the day, throughout the week, things like that. So our population fluctuates up and down. So on July 5th, our population may have actually been double the number that they were using, which makes that 110 cases even smaller. So that pushes it back down. The margin of error is at that point, I would say up to, actually, let me not speculate because BioBot will give us a better answer when they're able to respond to us next week. So with the margin of error getting a little bit bigger, little fluctuations in that sample size comes out to a bigger number. So it's unfortunately can be a little artificially inflated. And then just real quick, before I go into dissecting 110, we're doing our same outreach. And then once again, next steps, continue to educate and maintain vigilance. Now, let me close this up and speak to you directly. So the July 5th sample showed up with 110 cases. That is based on the population of the people who were here on July 5th, which when they do that calculation versus a static population of 16,000, that 110 probably translates down closer to around 90. And of those 90, we'll bring it down to the 10% who are showing severe symptoms. And then those are the people who are showing up to our sample size. We had, if you remember, 3 cases show up in that weekend period. Those are the people who are self-selecting in the PCR. So it's possible that those 6 people who are showing symptoms, approximately 6 people who are showing symptoms, either just didn't present to the hospital or were only here for a day trip or something like that, which is why the masks are very important. We were able to connect with BioBot on Friday, where we asked questions about the validation of this study on the website, where David is posting all the testing you'll see that there's a little link that says see our research. You can click on those links so you can read the validation studies and the white papers that they have. That validation study basically shows that while they were testing in Boston, they were able to connect and draw direct correlation using linear regression. So I use correlation, but for people like Christy, who knows that means something different, could be from correlation and causation. What they were able to find was a direct predictive analytic between the sewer and the case spike. They did find, however, that in the sewer, the case spikes show up higher than what they're actually seeing in their cases. That's how they're able to predict that most of the people are showing the shedding ahead of time. And then through further data, through their white papers, they find that you're actually shedding the virus before you show symptoms. Wanted to just really quickly go through, because I know questions are probably the most important part. So I can sit here and spout information, but really more important, I want to hear your questions.
Anybody have questions? Melissa?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Roberto. Another really great, concise. I have about 3 questions, if you don't mind. Do you know what the turnaround timeline is for the PCR testing currently? I've heard some rumors that there's a backlog.
So it depends on which lab's being used. So on the Cape, we're hearing that the Quest Diagnostics laboratories are having a backlog of up to 7 days. We're using the Broad Institute here through MIT. We're getting information between 48 to 72 hour turnaround right now. But depending on how much backlog ends up going, that number might actually go up. But right now we're still at that 2 to 3 day turnaround.
Yeah. Okay, great. And is the false negative rate for PCR testing about the same? I think it was around 30%.
Not anymore.
Okay.
As they've perfected the technique and fixed with sensitivity and things like that, the false negative number is actually much smaller. I have to go back and get the exact number for you, but I think it's closer to a 9% now. But
that's really great news.
I will go back and take a look at that.
Thank you. And then the new cases that we've seen just in the past week. I know that last time we were updated that the folks who had tested positive had traveled here, so there was less of a concern about community transmission. Any concerns about community transmission with the new cases?
Absolutely. There's definitely concern of community transmission on the people we're investigating right now. We'll know more tomorrow.
Okay.
Based on the 2 cases.
And in that case, when we do have concerns with that, can you just explain a little bit how the contact tracing works? I've had some questions for people who are like, will we know if we were at the Stop and Shop with somebody? Or so I'm curious if you could explain to the public how that would work.
So yeah, absolutely. A contact is the way the definition of a contact is you have to be within 6 feet of the person for 10 to 15 minutes. So contacts are actually, you have to be exposed to the person for a significant amount of time, sharing a car with them, sharing meals with them, being in close proximity. Just simply walking by somebody at Stop and Shop shouldn't be enough to get you infected, especially if both of you are wearing masks. I don't know if any of you have seen the Bill Nye mask videos, the mask TikTok. It's really worth watching on how good it is, how good the masks are at blocking the airflow. I will probably have to go back to my little whiteboard here to explain contact tracing because it's a little bit of its own little animal there. So actually, yeah, we'll have to use the whiteboard. I know it's harder to see. I'm gonna have to get one of those little whiteboards and draw it right here like a homeschooler. So when you have a regular contact, we'll call that the index case. That's the person who gets sick. Where is that person? So we have to find out where they were over the last 3 to 5 days. And my little 5 looks like a monkey. 5 days. So where were they in the last 3 to 5 days while they were infectious? So in that infectious period, they say we went to, I'm just throwing out words here. I went to Stop and Shop, Annie's, and the meat market. And then I ate dinner at Charlie Noble, and I sat inside, even though I know they're not really doing much inside. And while we were at Charlie Noble, I was there with 3 of my friends. So we now go to those 3, we contact them, and then we test them. So, and then when we talk about Stop and Shop, we ask how long they were in Stop and Shop, what did they do, where did they go, what did they buy, what sections of the grocery store were they. So if they got into contact with things like the sushi thing at the meat market, and they ended up touching a bunch of things, we'll contact the meat market and let them know that their product may have been contaminated and they have to get rid of some of those products. So these 3 those are probably the 3 main contacts at this point. Those incidental contact, we're not going to be able to trace. Somebody who touches the same door handle as you. Just why hand washing is so important. Also, as far as hand washing, when I was in college, I was the head of one of the PR campaigns called The Fifth Guy, because the study shows that 1 out of every 5 men do not wash their hands. Don't be that 5th guy. Wash your hands. This is why it's so important. So then we have those three people that we test. Let's say 2 of them come back negative. So we eliminate those 2, but 1 of them comes back positive. So we now continue. We ask them the same sets of questions. They had 4 contacts. Those 4 contacts, let's say all of them were wearing masks. All 4 come back negative. That 1 index case was only responsible for 1 new case. In the situation of something like a super spread event, which is what you saw in Boston with the Biogen IDEC group, this was the speaker at the group. He ended up being sick, and he was symptomatic but not heavily symptomatic. So where the speaker, kind of, you should have known better, the doctor who was speaking coughed in his hand, and he hadn't washed his hands. The people came up to congratulate him. He shook every single one of their hands. Over 100 people ended up sick from that. And including health directors in other towns who husbands worked at Biogen. A friend of mine ended up coming down with it because of that, because her husband worked at Biogen. So that's why it's so important to keep the masks on and wash your hands all the time, even the good old ubiquitous Purell.
Thank you. And so you did answer it really well. And so I guess this is more of a statement than a question, but maybe a statement with a question mark at the end. For both the contact tracing or community transmission on contact tracing and the sewer data, which may give us some predictions on numbers of cases, as a community, there's nothing more to be done than wearing our masks, washing our hands, and practicing social distancing. Is that correct?
That is the single most important part. You have to pay attention to this behavioral change, the social behavioral changes, because that's our primary defense. People like to say that doctors and nurses are our first line of defense. No, they're the last line of defense. You are the first line of defense as the public, paying attention to your social distancing, your hand washing, and your masks.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, Don, for letting me ask all those questions.
Awesome. Anybody else? Jason?
Just want to thank Roberto for the presentation last week and this week. It's been great. It helps me be able to speak to all of our constituents. It's very clear, and I love a whiteboard. If you can get a bigger one, great. If not, just keep that one. And I will not be the 5th guy. I love that too. Thank you.
I'm probably going to take this thing off the wall so that I can just draw on it here and show it.
I don't think we have anything additional in terms of the emergency order status beyond that. So should we move to Amy Baxter for an update on restaurants?
Okay, thank you. What I wanted to go through, I think Erica's going to share. I wanted to kind of, we can ask questions about restaurants, but mostly understand phase 3 and how that affects events, gatherings, and excuse me, entertainment. I tried to high level what the points are from the state guidance that came out earlier this month regarding this. So basically in phase 3, what they're starting to allow are some indoor and outdoor events, including venues like indoor and outdoor event spaces, ballrooms, private party rooms, public places like parks, and then a couple of exercise type of things. What's still not allowed are large capacity event venues and activities organized to draw large crowds. That includes dance floors, bars, nightclub type settings, anything with self-serve unattended buffets, drink stations and communal serving type areas, exhibitions and convention halls, street festivals, parades and other types of festivals, road races and other large organized amateur events or professional group events. Those are still expected to be phase 4, which we understand to be a treatment or vaccine. So I don't believe that's something that's coming anytime this season or this year. Next slide, Erica. Thank you. So basically what this new phase did was start to outline the group sizes as we had been limited prior to this. So basically it's saying that if you have an indoor event, indoor type of space, a ballroom or type of thing, again, it's similar to retail with the 8 persons per 1,000 square feet of accessible space indoors, but no more than 25 people. So that is across the board, no more than 25 people in the indoor spaces, no matter what the space. Outdoor events are being allowed at 25% of an occupancy. If there is an occupancy in an outdoor space, generally that's an enclosed outdoor space, think Cisco or something like that with a closed area, 25% of the occupancy, no more than 100 people in an event setting. And again, if it's a wide open space, an outdoor open park, it goes back to the 8 per 1,000 square feet, no more than 100 in outdoor spaces. For all events, we're looking at occupancy numbers, and I know we go back and forth with this even before the pandemic. Occupancy includes every human in this space, whether they're staff, attendees, other workers, someone wandering in. That occupancy number is every human in that space. I'm calling it obviously the rule of 6. You think of no matter what the space or what the type of setting, if they're standing, sitting, it's groups of 6 people, no more than 6 people, distance 6 feet apart, just like we're seeing in restaurants and things of that sort. So 6 people, 6 feet apart. So they should all be separated in that category. There shouldn't be parties larger than that. And they recommend that it's limited to related or associated members of the same party in that 6. So we're saying no mingling and no things that make an event fun, none of that. And so basically those were the guidelines for a lot of these events. And then when you start getting into the layers of events and activities, you go to the sector guidance. So like I said last week, it's layers. So you have an event, it has food services, restaurant guidance, musical performance, theater and performance venue guidance, which I'll get into here in a minute. So they started expanding maybe number of people in certain spaces, but then we go back to the sector guidance. So it's all pretty much related. Can we flip to the next one, please? Thank you. And so just discussing live entertainment, and this will obviously affect restaurants and others, but right now, as far as what's categorized as live entertainment, drive-in movie theaters, as we now have one. So those guidance is still the same. Indoor movie theaters, which Dreamland is allowed to be opened at 40% occupancy or never more than 25 people in a single enclosed space, consistent as we just discussed with events. Outdoor performance venues are allowed at 25% if we had one occupancy, and again, no more than 100 people, same guidelines. And what is discouraged in outdoor venues, but if it can be allowed in certain circumstances, but discouraged is singing, unfortunately, and playing of brass and wind instruments. If that is allowed in any type of performance outdoors, there's special distancing requirements, 10 feet between performers and at least 25 feet between the performers and any front row or table of guests watching the performance. And again, performers are encouraged to wear face coverings if possible. So that covers music, and if you had an outdoor theater or anything of that sort. There are more layers to this. I didn't put everything because it gets kind of complicated. So there's other type of performance guidance as well. Again, what's not allowed is other types of indoor theater and performance venues, plays, musicals, live performances. Unfortunately for those groups, still nothing inside. And again, indoor performances may not include singing or the playing of wind or brass instruments. That's a straight no on those types of activities indoors. We flip to the next one. So I put together some staff recommendations. What I'm really looking for you, and then I'll ask for questions here, is how this affects different things. We have obviously not been doing any event permits. We, at the very front of this, suspended that activity until we started to see more opening up of larger groups and things of that sort. So just based on everything we're seeing right now and looking at other towns and what's going on, the recommendations I'm looking at to hear from the select board is how we're going to apply this in different areas on town property. So what I'm asking for here is the discussion of town beaches. Obviously, a lot of the larger events, pops and things of that sort, have been canceled or are virtual this year and not on the beaches. Other things we tend to do on beaches is permit catering and other types of private type events with people having catered dinner or whatever it is. And sometimes alcohol permit comes with that as well. So that's something that happens a lot. What we're asking for this year is really, I don't think permitting of events or catered gatherings on town beaches is something we're looking to do in phase 3. I think we've been looking to have the beaches left open for the public. And I believe, other beaches at Land Bank overseas, that is at their discretion, but I think they're going along the same lines right now. We're talking about Jetties, Nantucket, Fisherman's, Maya Comet, Smith's Point, Surfside, and a few others that some folks like to go to. Obviously, families can go, bring your to-go orders, do what you're going to do on the beach, but the policy would be probably not permitting anything specific on those beaches. Town parks, we can consider limited activities, maybe at Children's Beach in coordination with Culture and Tourism that does some activities in the summer, possibly Tom Nevers if requested, priority to some local nonprofit or community organizations that may want to have an activity and can follow the protocols and guidelines, but no alcohol permits in those areas as well. This will apply to licensed event premises. If there's a ballroom, think of a hotel or some other event spaces, they must follow the protocol per the Commonwealth and the phase guidelines that we just went through in those areas as well. Live music is something we've discussed here as the restaurants have expanded. The recommendation is restaurants with current outdoor live music licenses are to follow the protocol as listed, which would be, they've been doing one musician solo in these areas, and we would probably ask that that continue or to follow with the recommendations of the state as far as distancing. Restaurants with indoor live music or nightclub licenses, there's no room for singers, brass or wind instruments or any type of live performance right now. That kind of goes into the nightclub territory. There's no performance setup, no dancing area, and seated tables only. So that should continue as it is. Restaurants with a temporary expanded outdoor spaces maintain current policy of background streaming music only until 10 p.m. We may be able to consider a temporary permit as long as the basic protocol can be followed, but it'd be a very limited basis. Ballrooms, again, licensed premises to follow the protocols, as well as tents and gatherings at private homes. We've had this question a bit from caterers and things. What if it's in someone's backyard? Obviously, like we said, the virus doesn't stop and ask if it's a private event or public. So those protocols should be considered active at those locations as well. So I'll stop there. That's the kind of high level review. Any questions on this phase thus far? As you can see.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody. I don't, oh, Jason, go ahead.
Sorry, I always got a question or comment. Thank you, Amy. So question, if I wanted to organize a walk that starts at Children's Beach and, you know, promoting some kind of positive movement, could I do that now if I met the protocols?
Right. I would move to say no. You know, we're talking about races or parades or street festivals or things like that where you can't maintain social distancing in different groups. You know, maybe one held stick and they kept 6 feet apart. I don't know, but I would say probably from this guidance that would be no right now, any type of activity like that.
The way it was sounding that you could have groups of 6 and they couldn't be within 6 feet of people, so you could have people gather around and then space out and do something.
Yep. I think something like that would be no, because it's a movement, it's a parade, that separation might not be contained. And it's basically, if you're sitting or standing in a space, it's prescribed for certain spaces and areas, what those capacities are and the distancing that you can maintain. That's why a parade or something like that, it can't be maintained.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So something like a Shakespeare, I'm just making things up, but things that I've seen at Children's Beach, a Shakespeare performance, theater, if everybody was spread out, could be more controlled, something like that could maybe happen if there was occupancy and...
Yeah, it's something that can be considered again. And like I've seen a lot of places are asking for COVID plans that go with it. So they would have to address any sort of request, would have to address all these different parameters. And again, there's much more detailed parameters for a performance like that, as far as like they can't have fight scenes, intimate scenes, anything. They'd have to stand on opposite sides of the stage and like wave at each other. But, you know, it's something like that. So again, in a lot of these areas, we'll consider things and can have the discussion, so long as there's a plan that we can actually work with and see if it would work. And then we would bring that forward.
Okay, one more question, Madam Chair, is the singers versus single musician, like no singers, but a single musician. Do you mean no singers of like part of a band kind of thing?
I think the thought is, and again, I know some have the shields and things of that sort, is anything that you're singing, you're spitting, or you're out into an area, and that's the thing with brass and wind. Anything you're flowing into or things of that sort, those things seem to be what's off the table, because it could carry. And if you do that outside, that could be considered outside again. But you would need the distance as well to keep folks safe. Hopefully they can wear masks. The one musician, if you have a guitar or things of that sort, I think would be preferred. It's those things that might, spread any type of virus out that is discouraged. Definitely not indoors, but possible outdoors if you can maintain the proper distances.
Thank you.
Christy?
Thank you, Amy, for going over all of that. I feel like this year is kind of the year of thinking outside of the box and thinking really creatively, and just wondering if there's been any thought or requests about doing, live concerts in other places, or places like the Gaslight or the Chicken Box that can't bring the talent that they typically bring. Is there an opportunity for them to do something, as you mentioned, maybe Tom Nevers or closing down Main Street? Has there been any conversations like that?
So a couple things, I know we've thought about possible special event closures and things like that downtown and other areas. The one thing I'm looking at is, as we look at street festivals, parades, things like that gather people like that, is really frowned upon and not allowed. And I think it's something we have to watch out for. If we close a street and try to do something like that, how do you maintain the proper distance? So, like we just approved last week, or you just approved last week, was the concept at Conservation Land, which is a drive-in kind of a stage where they have the space and the ability to separate folks that way. So something of that sort, obviously, is the best option. As far as like Gaslight and those types of things downtown, I think right now having a performance inside is going to be unlikely. But again, I think we can consider special temporary ideas and events, as long as, it's something I'd want approved because it's obviously outdoors in that space. And as long as proper distance can be kept and people are still seated and it's not too, too much, is not drawing too much of a crowd. So that's kind of where we have to have those considerations. But I think at this point, we'll certainly have the conversation and can have that ability to talk it through if they have the proper plan that follows this guidance.
Go ahead, Kristen.
And just one other question on the PowerPoint. We expanded the outdoor entertainment for some for this year, and that was just for background music. Is there any opportunity for them to have a single performer, like a guitar?
Yes, so I think that would be something similar, as we're saying, those, like, you mentioned Gaslight, and I don't mean to point them out, but their live music permit is only for indoors as it is. So even they would have to apply for anything different. All these outdoor spaces are all new. So even if they have a live music for another part of the facility, they would have to apply for it. So we can certainly do that. And again, following this protocol. But we don't want to obviously be too crazy downtown, and we have to really be careful about the space and safety and that sort of thing. But certainly, again, now that we have some guidance, we can kind of go by that.
Thank you.
Oh, Jason?
Chair, do you want a motion for those recommendations, or at least I can at least give you my opinion on the not allowing any permanent events on the beaches? I think it makes sense to leave those open so everybody families and people can gather there and be outside. So that makes sense to me. I don't want to hurt the caterers or event planners, but if there's a way to do it on private property and they can do it there safely, then I like the idea of leaving the beaches open for everyone and not having events, at least on town beaches. Any thoughts, or do you need
No, thank you. I was just, after people had their questions, I was just going to say, what does everyone think about the recommendations? And does someone want to make a motion? Matt, discussion?
Yeah, I want to thank, I'm like, thought, can you hear me?
A little bit.
Can you hear me now better?
Yeah, you broke up for a minute, but you're better now.
All right. No, thank you for having it written and having a recommendation like that. It makes it a lot easier to consider. And I think the recommendations are all good. The one thing I will say is I think when we start talking about sort of festivals, things that will turn into Mardi Gras, anything with alcohol on the beach, downtown, eventually, unless we're going to have an enforcement alongside it, I think we care. The guard down seeing across the country is young people. They're seeing young people in these venues. What is spiking? Florida. And a lot of the states are rolling back now because of that. And we do not want to roll back. We want to continue to move forward positively. And I think recommend us to do so. Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Melissa. Is everyone ready to go to a vote?
If I may, Dawn, I just want to add also my thanks to Amy for the clarity of the recommendations and my 2 cents for a really conservative approach to event approval. I do agree that, we have to think beyond just how we're going to improve our economy over these next 6 to 8 weeks and think about how we're going to live in our community in the fall. So I appreciate that.
Janet, did you want to say something before we vote?
Yes, I did. I wanted to mention that the town had applied for a Streets and Shared Spaces grant and received a grant of $56,000. And we've decided to use that to work with the chamber to see how we can extend the fall season, because we're already up and running with the restaurants. So Amy and Christy and her Chamber of Commerce role will be meeting to figure out a process to identify how we can use that money to bring in tents or heaters or whatever, so that we can extend the season into the fall and maybe all the way through Stroh. And I think that's a great development, and just wanted to let you know that that was going on as well.
Thank you for mentioning that. I had heard that earlier today, but I'm not sure if the rest of the board members did or the public. So it's really exciting that we received that funding. Christy?
I just want to say a quick thank you to town admin for getting that grant in so fast. I know it was a really quick turnaround when the Baker administration announced it, and it's really going to help support our business community this fall.
Thank you. Are we ready to vote? I support the recommendations, and I would just note that, you know, this is evolving and things can change as time passes. I'll take a vote by roll call. Melissa Murphy?
Aye.
Jason Bridges?
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella?
Aye.
Matt Fee?
Aye.
John Holgate, aye. Passes unanimously. And Amy, again, thank you so much for laying it out this way. It was very clear and thought out. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. One other thing I had at the end there is just an update that the loading zone areas and an additional zone was not converted, but we added signs to allow them to be 15-minute curbside delivery and pickup spaces this week, thanks to Ray at DPW, who's awesome and did that. So at the end of that PowerPoint, you can take a look. Oh, thank you. These locations were added in the different times. So those signs are up. You can flip to the next one. It'll show you all those locations are up and running. It has a loading zone sign. Each are numbered, so there can be communication should there need to be between the restaurant or retail location and that. So hopefully that's something to help. I talked to a bunch of restaurants who are still dealing with a lot of folks who want to do to go and don't feel safe coming back in yet. So hopefully that'll help with them with that. So that's an update there on that. So far, so good. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. You know what? There was a park. I meant to bring this up earlier. I'll just bring it up now. There was a parking space that's been eliminated that I'm puzzled by because it's always been a parking space and we never had a discussion about it. It is on the right-hand side of Main Street as you would turn to go to the gas light, and now there is a no parking sign in front of Murray's Liquors, and I don't know why.
Yeah, that was a safety issue with, we still have loading coming in there and trucks coming in there for deliveries and that sort of thing. And when we were trying to do it, so it's to allow the truck, so that way it's not stopping traffic. The truck can pull up and come in. So that way we weren't eliminating access for loading right there to Murray's and to others. There was a car, cars there, and it just was getting dangerous. So that way we're not stopping traffic. Yeah.
That was I just wasn't sure about that, but
yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
No, that's just always been a nice sneaky spot that people think is part of the parking spot.
I know. There's a lot of sneaky spots gone, so I apologize to folks, but yeah.
Janet?
Dawn, I noticed that today too. I
didn't particularly like the sign because it's not consistent with the wooden signs in town, but Janet?
Wow. I just failed to mention that the author of that grant for the streets and shared spaces was Greg Tibden. He did a really great research and quick turnaround, and he deserves a shout out for that.
Great job, Greg. Melissa?
Thank you, Don. I'm not sure if it's in this section. I noticed there was the public restroom slide, and I just wanted to ask, I don't know if it's appropriate to ask Janet or Amy, just how that's going. There was a lot of TBDs on that map. So how are visitors finding restrooms, and are we meeting the demand this year?
We get a lot of, not a lot, we had 40 people today, so volume is down at visitor services, but we have clear signage out about where the restrooms are, and they're also limited to one person per vehicle. I would say that because the Cisco van isn't running, the volume of people using that when they come back from Cisco is significantly reduced. So I think the need is being adequately met. I do know that the Dreamland isn't open this summer because they didn't have staff to and I was involved in those conversations, but I think the public restrooms people are finding where they need to go.
Do we know if the Dreamland will be open now that the theater will be open? Or at least during some hours?
They are open. They're allowed to be open. I know that they had some shows this weekend. I'm not exactly sure of their schedule, and I believe that the restrooms are open when they're open for movies, but I would have to check on that.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions on this part? Okay. Do we have additional public information to report?
We don't have too much this week. We're continuing to update the website and getting lots of information out on social media. We continue not to have a specific date that the town offices will be unlocked and people will be able to come in at will. However, a number of departments are doing appointments, and everybody is providing the public with service in a remote fashion. And to my knowledge, we have no complaints about that. So people seem to be able to be served. Still no word on the registry of motor vehicles, but I did get an email a short time ago from Senator Sears saying that they are still very actively working on it, and they're hoping for the best, but we just don't know yet.
Do we know if passports are open for appointments?
Roberto?
Taylor mentioned to me that they'll be opening passports this coming week through appointments only.
Thank you. Melissa?
Already forgot my question. I was riveted by the passport one. I'll think of it.
Okay, let me know. I'll come back to you. Next up, we have public comment for items that are not on our agenda, or otherwise. Oh, go ahead.
I remembered. And so while we're, I wanted to thank Florencia and Greg for the public outreach efforts, and also for the coordination of the COVID educator tables. It looks like that's a really successful effort and part of our general community outreach. So thank you to everyone. And Libby, are you still looking for volunteers for COVID educator tables?
I think so, yes. And that is coordinated through Taylor. There is an online application that people can fill out of sorts. And if you fill that out, it goes to her and she organizes who's going there. So she's been fabulous at that. You get a shirt and some masks to hand out. I did it with Jason Grazier Day last week for an hour. It's kind of fun. You might see some people you know going by, but at our table, I would say 99.9% of the people going by us were wearing masks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Back to this is the time for public comment for items that are otherwise not on our agenda and not related to COVID-19. I know that some people are concerned with the PFAS. We are having an executive session meeting tomorrow, so we will not be answering any questions or addressing that topic this evening. Anyone is welcome to make any comment that they wish, but generally public comment is for us to take in information and we will get back to you. And written comments can always be sent in. I see Megan Perry has her hand up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I was just going to open to the community that there will be a presentation by Dr. Kuhn next Monday at 6 p.m. on PFAS. Just know a lot of people aren't on social media and weren't able to see it. I did invite the board and a number of departments, and that's open and free to the public, sponsored by Nantucket Tipping Point. Thank you.
Thank you. And you do have a limit of 100 people on that, right?
If we get more than 100 people in, so sign up early and often.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else this evening with a public comment? Okay, seeing none. We have no new business that I'm aware of, and we have some payroll warrants, treasury warrants, and pending contracts. There are 3 pending contracts. Are there questions on those? You could take all 3 of these items as one motion, if not.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor by roll call. Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
Christy Ferrantella,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges,
Aye.
Don Holgate, aye. All 3 passed unanimously. Citizen departmental requests. We have Finance Department request for approval of FY 2020 year-end budget transfers. Brian Turbett, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, board members. So given the fact that we did have the annual town meeting in June, we have substantially fewer transfer requests than we have in the past. I do want to also attribute that to the hard work that Ali Penta, our finance and budget analyst, put in with all of the department heads leading up to the town meeting, and then working with them after the town meeting to ensure that everything was in order. We only have 2 transfer requests, which we presented to the select board, or excuse me, to the FinCom last night, and they did unanimously approve them. The first one is to transfer from general insurance $150,000 to the fire department operations. The chief had approached us about starting to phase the replacement of the turnout gear. And when we did the analysis, we thought that we could fund some of this to let him start the program in fiscal 20, and this 150 will cover the beginning of that project, which will carry into fiscal 21 and possibly into fiscal 22, but most likely we may be able to accomplish it all in 21. The second is to transfer $50,000 to the town clerk operations. A great majority of this, some of this money is related to the purchase of new voting machines, which the town clerk needed to be able to order and get in due to timing to be able to put those into service. There's also some increased costs around the annual town meeting and the elections that were run through her budget. We're doing, as part of the year-end close, a complete scrub of all the budgets to be able to transfer as many costs to the COVID emergency fund that we created. But in the event that not all of those can be covered within that, we do need to close that small deficit that was there, which is why we're proposing this $50,000. And as I do say, and every year, if we're able to transfer money to that special revenue fund for this, any money that's unused based on that transfer would just go automatically to free cash when we close the full fiscal year. So the total transfers that we're asking for your approval tonight under Chapter 44, Section 33B is $200,000.
So moved.
All those in favor by roll call. Christy Ferrantella.
Aye.
Matt Fee. Matt Fee.
Aye.
Jason Bridges.
Aye.
Melissa Murphy.
Aye.
Don Holgate, aye. Passes unanimously. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much.
And then we have our town clerk request for approval of electioneering policy. Nancy, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I think you all know, I requested this policy for all future years, not just thinking of fiscal 2020, which is ever changing even since I submitted this agenda item to Erica a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. This will be for all future periods when we have early voting with a physical presence of early voters in the town building, so that people, just like when they come to the polls on election day, they can't wear pins or hats or say things to people as they're walking in the building, or heaven forbid, stand in the hallways or gather outside with signs. So just, as I said in the memo, to keep decorum and order. Since I submitted this, the state has set up the early voting hours for the state primary, which is September 1st, and the November 3rd general election. And just to let you know, this will be very well advertised by both and promoted by both the state and us, but the dates for early voting for the September 1st primary are for a week prior to September 1st. It starts Saturday, August 22nd. It includes a Saturday and a Sunday. all through the following Friday to August 28th. And then it will be the 2 weeks prior to the November election, starting Saturday, October 17th. And it includes 2 Saturdays and 2 Sundays in October. I had a meeting yesterday with the Cape and Islands town clerks, and there's a bit of confusion and a little bit of disagreement as to what the new regulations mean in terms of, in the past, it was always mandated that early voting be physically held in the town building. You could designate an additional place, but you had to do it in your town building. We are all in the same situation. Our town buildings aren't open. And I don't know if that's going to change by the last week in August, but I'm a little unclear as to where this in-person early voting is going to happen in 2020, particularly in August. But regardless, we still need this electioneering policy going forward for all future early voting elections. And, you know, hopefully the state will clarify things to us soon. Thank you.
Thank you. We need a motion.
Move approval.
Second that.
All those in favor by roll call: Christy Ferrantino,
Aye.
Matt Fee,
Aye.
Jason Bridges,
Aye.
Melissa Murphy,
Aye.
John Holgate, aye. That passes unanimously. Erica?
Sorry, Nancy had 2 versions of a policy in the packet, and I'm not sure which version you're approving.
Oh. Yeah.
I was voting on the first version.
Yeah, the recommended one.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Next, we move to committee reports. Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee recommendation. I believe Mary Longacre is going to present this.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I have some opening remarks, and then I can read the recommendation, which you have in your packet. The Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee was formed by the Select Board 1 year ago to assist the newly hired Coastal Resilience Coordinator, Vince Murphy, with implementing a Coastal Resilience Plan, with integrating the Coastal Resilience Plan with other town planning documents, with reviewing existing regulations, and with keeping the Select Board up to date on impacts from sea level rise. Thanks to hard work from the committee, but primarily by Vince and Holly Backus and Chuck Larson, we expect the contract for developing the Coastal Resilience Plan to be awarded to a consulting firm at the end of the summer. This is unfortunately 2 years behind the town's original schedule, and we anticipate it will be a further 12 to 18 months before the town receives the final Coastal Resilience Plan. In the interim, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee feels it's important to begin incorporating sea level rise planning into current projects. The town received a Coastal Risk Assessment and Resilience Strategies report from Malone Groom in January, which offers a sobering look at the risks the town faces from sea level rise. However, the report doesn't recommend specific mitigation solutions for specific areas. That is what the future Coastal Resilience Plan will do. The strategies report does offer this recommendation on page 26, and I'm going to quote from the report. For planning purposes, it is advisable to use intermediate or high sea level rise projections such that a community will be better protected against worst case scenarios, end quote. The strategies report offers several sets of projections, such as those from NOAA, the Army Corps of Engineers, and from Massachusetts, each of which contains several different scenarios, is calculated from different data, and looks at different future timeframes. One of the points that came up in our committee discussion of the report is the need for a specific standard to provide clear guidance. With our recommendation, we wanted to extract from the strategy report these key points: to be aware of sea level rise and to plan accordingly until we have more location-specific guidance from the Coastal Resilience Plan in 2021. Therefore, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is making this recommendation to provide awareness, clarity, and in preparation for the 2021 Coastal Resilience Plan. To read the recommendation, pending the select board's acceptance of a detailed coastal resilience plan and its specific project recommendations, for which an RFP is currently in the procurement process, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee proposes the following recommendation to the select board. The CRAC recommends all town departments, boards, commissions, and committees, and any service providers, contracted engineers, and consultants need to be aware of and to use the NOAA high projections to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise in their decisions, deliberations, and project planning. These data are periodically updated by NOAA and will be posted on the CRAC webpage on the town's website. Let me further just read the intent of this recommendation, and that is the purpose of the recommendation is to supplement FEMA flood elevations, which do not include sea level rise. I'm going to spare you all of the supporting information, except to mention that we have a link there to the town webpage, which contains the Coastal Risk Assessment and Resilience Strategies report. Happy to offer more detail. Vince Murphy, the Coastal Resilience Coordinator, is here. Happy to take questions, whatever I can do.
I have a question. I'm just trying to wrap my head around like an example of this. Could you,
yes. So I have a couple prepared.
I say like our marine building.
Yes.
We're getting ready to hopefully build in the near future.
So the intent here is to provide awareness. I'm somewhat familiar with the new Harbor Master building on Washington Street. My understanding of that project is that the site is very constrained for the functions that are required there. So if somebody were to review sea level rise planning, they may legitimately decide that there is no further modification to that Harbor Master building plan that would accommodate any new information from sea level rise. That building has already been designed with the FEMA flood regulations in mind. This recommendation is not to mandate a particular action. It's to mandate that the planning process include this information. The result of reviewing the information is not something that we're specifying here. Again, that would be something that the Coastal Resilience Plan would have more to say on. This is a first step in beginning to incorporate the relevant information into the planning process. Let me offer a second example that would have a different outcome. The Harbor Place development, for instance. It's also right on the water. It's also an area where you would want to look at sea level rise. And I would anticipate that the information would be incorporated into that plan because there hasn't, to my knowledge, been a definitive engineering set of documents drawn up. So there is still an opportunity there. A further example that I can offer that's not related so much to engineering, which is not my forte, the Housing Committee, the Affordable Housing Trust, I believe it is, when they met to set the parameters for evaluating properties for the Neighborhood First program, I attended one of their meetings and pointed out that they could include evaluation criteria related to erosion or flooding to their list of evaluation criteria. And they seem to receive that positively. And I haven't looked at the final criteria, but my point being that I was asking that the information being included in the planning process, but we were not trying to dictate an outcome. So those hopefully are useful examples.
Thank you. That answered my question. Does anybody else have questions? I do have an audience. And Libby?
I don't have so much of a question, but Mary alleviated some of the concerns that we had initially about this. However, I would want Chuck to make any comments that he might have. I think we were a little concerned about clarification. Mary may have just done that. But Chuck, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Libby. Nice to see everybody. Good evening. So I was asked by Libby to take a look at an earlier version of this recommendation. There's only a few minor changes that were made. I spent a little bit of time reviewing it and thinking through how can it be implemented, how will it be used in planning and project design. And so I was looking at it as a licensed professional engineer. If I had this guidance, what would it, how would this kind of be put to use, and is it clear and is it consistent? And so I provided 4 pages of questions and comments, which were sent to Vince and then ultimately, I believe, to Mary as well. And so I have not had any response on some of those comments. So, I think there's some valid points there. You did clarify a few things in your revised document. Some of these are more practical about implementation, such as you've made this recommendation to consider a certain level of sea level rise with a very conservative scenario. Have you identified the basic areas that are going to be impacting this in terms of expanding flood areas and expanding, the number of buildings? And also, does this apply to just town buildings, or is this town and private buildings? I think some of those things really need to be, kind of identified, this. And, I don't want to go through all 4 pages, but, I think there's an opportunity as well to say, sure, stormwater levels are increasing and a concern, but what about the basic, increase in high tide flooding and the flooding that we'll see on a daily basis? And we can speak a little bit, about what we're seeing on Easy Street, and that's a whole nother, presentation if we want to get into that. I think, I applaud the work of Mary and Vince and the team there to put this together. It's a very difficult, task to do, but I think there are some things that really need to be thought through and clarified based on, what I've put together.
Mary and Vince both have
I would be happy to respond, and I'm glad to do it in the context of the meeting with everybody attending rather than personally to Chuck. I think that Vince did respond to some of his questions. Primarily, we're trying to stay within the scope of our charge as a committee, which is that we are an advisory committee to the select board. So it doesn't seem appropriate that we would pick properties or areas or engineering data or floodplains to apply this metric to. Our purpose in providing this recommendation is to give a single standard to all of those committees, boards, departments, persons involved in project planning, to say that we want to make sure that you're aware of this information, but we believe that you are the best person to make the decisions about your project. We don't believe it's within our purview as a committee, which is advisory, to give you specific advice on a specific location or a specific building. However, that may be coming as part of the coastal resilience plan. This is a preliminary step to that. Again, it's focused on awareness. It's focused on inserting this into the planning process, but it is definitely not intended to provide specific guidance for a specific site or building or project. I can speak to a little bit about the sea level rise projections. The NOAA projections are based on data from a tide gauge that is here on Nantucket. And that was one of the reasons why we recommended this data set in particular. They actually just released this month updated data, or updated recommendations. And that's another reason why we chose the NOAA data, is because it is frequently updated. Part of what was released is that the flooding due to sea level rise, and Vince, I'm gonna punt over to you because I know you're gonna get the numbers right from this report, and they're in very small print on my screen. But it has, as I said, some sobering information about the risks that we are facing. And that's, again, we feel that it is important at this time to begin facing that risk. Vince, if you'd go ahead and read off the numbers from that, thank you.
Go ahead, Vince. You're muted. Oh, Mary, you need to mute. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just have to get to the correct screen now, beg your pardon. So in general, the easiest way of looking at it is that Nantucket is projected to see at least 4 to 6 feet of sea level rise by 2100 within the next 80 years. Some of the recommendations, some of the scenarios, of which there's 7, could see anywhere between the intermediate level of 4 feet to about 4.33 feet, up to the high scenario, which is what this recommendation recommends, which is up as far as 9.25 feet. A lot of people use the intermediate high as kind of the top end of a projection of what is reasonable, and that comes out at 6.56 feet, just a little over 6.5 feet. And that is one of the reasons why this committee chose high, which goes up to 9.2 feet by the end of this, by the end of the century. Purpose for that is to have some level of a little gap, a little piece of redundancy, in order that if the scenarios are wrong, that there's extra space to accommodate sea level rise over time.
Could I ask Vince to also give the flooding projections from the NOAA report that came out in July?
Oh, the one from,
Yeah.
Yes, I was looking at this today. So I'm just going to have to find a different piece of data very quickly. Effectively, this was information that was looking at high tide flooding. So Chuck has prepared one report on this, and a similar report was done, I beg your pardon, by NOAA, that was just launched earlier this month. Effectively, it looks at how many high tide flooding days we can see on Nantucket per year. In the year 2000, for the sake of argument, there was 2 high tide flooding days. In surrounding years, it was about the same. So an average of about 2 high tide flooding days then. Currently in 2020, we're projected to see 3 to 7 high tide flooding days. In recent years, 2017 was a bit of a high when we saw at least 11 high tide flooding days. But that's kind of what's happened and what's currently happening. Once we start looking into the future, and this only provides 2 time scenarios into the future beyond 2020, and they're 2030 and 2050. So if you think Easy Street floods a lot, it's about to get worse, I'm very sorry to say. For 2030, just 10 years into the future from now, we could be looking at as much as 7 to 15 high tide flooding days per year. And by 2050, that could go up to 30 to 125 high tide flooding days per year. This is a non-linear increase. This is a very steep increase, and this is quite consistent with climate change. Quite consistent with sea level rise. So it is a very steep increase, and it's coming at us quite quickly. This is one of the reasons why we need to be particularly careful in the near coastal zones and some of the lower lying areas behind that.
Thank you. Chuck?
Yeah, just a couple of comments, and believe me, I don't want to get into a debate here. But for instance, Vince, you're describing, high tides, but what water elevations and what datum are we talking about? Because tides are referred to some portion of the tidal cycle or the North American vertical datum. And hence, our measures are based at some point and relative to that. Case in point, Table 1 does not provide any information on a datum, and hence that's incomplete information. Table 1 was also generated by a program provided by the Army Corps of Engineers. And there are multiple inputs to that to generate this table. That information is not clearly documented, so it can be reproducible. Or if things change, we'd want to be able to go back to it and, well, what were these inputs that gave us these range of values? I'm very cautious about putting something out there unless there's really a solid context and a clear thought process of how it'll be used. I think recommending one scenario for planning is probably a mistake, because projects can be built to be adaptable and hence initially designed to lower sea levels and then adapt over time. And hence the time period, the risk tolerance of a particular project is really going to come into the decision what scenario or scenarios should be used for planning. And I think it's important to remember sea level projections are not predictions. They do not forecast with certainty how much sea level is expected in the future, but they describe future potential conditions in a manner that supports decision-making under conditions of uncertainty. And so I'm a little bit cautious on these are the numbers, go to the cookbook, do this. There's a lot of interpretation, and I think we want to frame it that way so that we can make informed, accurate, meaningful decisions. And that's another bunch of comments that I had provided, but I'll kind of be happy to leave it there and answer any questions that people have.
Could I respond to that?
Mary?
Yeah, Vince, I'll take a crack, and you might have something to add. I agree with Chuck that there's a lot that you can do with this information. I think that's the point, is we're providing the awareness of the information, and we're saying to anyone contemplating a project, take a look at this, incorporate it into your project in the best way that you see fit, whether that's creating a building that's adaptable to a lower level and then a higher level, or whether that's building in the resilience for the highest scenario. What is your response? We're just asking you to include it in the planning process. The data is published by NOAA. We've referenced the report. So we have abstracted the data as supporting information, but we've also provided a link to the actual report. And that is available on the town's website. That report from Malone and McBroom does have the information that Chuck is looking for. It also has links back to the original source data. So in a sense, Chuck is correct. We're not providing the original source data as supporting information directly in our recommendation, but we are providing access to it. I would say that NOAA's process for creating the information is fully vetted. I don't think that there's a question about that. Vince, if you wanted to add anything to that, but I just want to stress again, within our capacity as an advisory committee, that is how we are framing this recommendation. We are not providing an engineering standard. We are asking that people's planning process include information relevant to sea level rise. If the chair wants Vince to add anything, please go ahead.
I think Matt had his hand up. Matt, did you have something?
Let Chuck go, and then I'll speak. That's fine.
So, Mary, I guess I'd like to clarify. There is inconsistency in the Malone and McBroom report regarding that table and its genesis. And hence, that elevates my caution that, this report has not been reviewed from a technical perspective. This information wasn't even really in the scope of the work from Malone and McBroom. They were to keep it at a high level and provide a range of options that might be, something the town would want to explore further. So on some level, I'm a bit concerned that we're trying to use the report, maybe beyond its intended scope. And when I accepted the report as the project manager, it was compared to the scope of work. And hence, the scope of work is entirely satisfied, but we did not go through and really do a deep technical review on this, as we're suggesting we're going to be including it in town guidelines or policy. And that's kind of another fundamental comment that I would like to see addressed. Because the information, as you refer to it, and kind of taking that chain backward, there are inconsistencies. And hence, those are some of my questions.
If Vince could respond with permission of the chair.
Yeah, Vince, go ahead. I'm kind of starting to wonder if you guys should have a further discussion about this and iron out some of these details and before bringing it back to us. Vince,
Okay,
go ahead.
Thank you. Well, that kind of gets to my very next question. I wonder if in that case, if we just in some ways changed the reference and brought the reference straight from directly from NOAA materials that would then show the exact elevations that it's based on and the reference material, then that could be one way of resolving it. Secondly, we could just invite Chuck to be part of the review before, if it were to come back before this committee.
I think I was thinking that maybe that you could work together with Chuck
yes.
and come back to us. Libby, what do you think?
That's fine with me. I understand where Chuck's coming from, but I also understand where the committee is coming from. And it sounded like a kind of a harmless recommendation to me, in the sense that it's not overly specific, but it's something that for now, until we have a plan, is more of a something to pay attention to and work into things that are not already underway. So I don't really have a problem with the recommendation necessarily, but I do think a lot of the things that Chuck is referring to obviously will be worked into guidelines or project-specific things, perhaps going forward with the plan.
Vince, then Matt had his hand up, then Christy has her hand up, and Rick Atherton had his hand up, but he took it down.
Okay.
Vince,
thank you very much. It is very much worth saying, and Libby kind of touched on it, that this is just something to be aware of in some ways, but it does have some implementable sides as well, because once you are aware of sea level rise, then you can start integrating it into whatever plan you're looking at. It doesn't necessarily have to be elevation. It could be other types of wet flood proofing, dry flood proofing, etc., not essentially just elevation. It is also very much a limited recommendation. This would only be in place, for sake of argument, a year and a half until the select board would accept the coastal resilience plan. Hopefully, fingers crossed, knock on wood, we should have a consultant contracted September. So within a year from then, we should have a coastal resilience plan. And then in the interim, before the coastal resilience plan would supersede this, we would at least have 1 year, maybe a year and a half potentially, of coverage and at least acknowledgement that sea level rise is a problem for developments and that these need to be taken account of.
thank you, Matt.
Yeah, I was comfortable making the recommendation. And part of the reason I am is we also have storm surge. Chuck mentioned it earlier. And so you have sea level rise of X amount, whatever it ends up being, we still have substantial storm surge in certain parts of the island where the water doesn't leave and it comes back, and then you get another tide. And so, I was comfortable with because we talked, and the committee was well aware of, a lot of the things that Chuck is talking about, that it's not a guarantee, it's a projection, it's not a guarantee that it's going to be that way. But I think, those issues sort of led to us. We wanted to be able to do something. I'm reading a book, Warnings, from Richard Clark, R.P. Eddy, and it's interesting. They have a chapter about sea level rise, and we can't put our head around this type of thing. It's too far in the future. It's too uncertain. It's too expensive. So there's a tendency. And I learned a new word, satisficing, which I didn't even know it existed. There's a tendency to pretend you're doing something and you don't really do it. You don't solve the problem. You act like you're solving the problem, but you don't solve it. And I think we have to be careful because of, the danger, the what we're dealing with on this island. We have to be careful that we actually are bold enough and have enough leadership to make some decisions that are going to be expensive and people aren't going to like them maybe, but that will solve this problem, and I think, we could argue about the numbers and we could argue about the height and the numbers and is this exactly right, till my kids are my age or older. And, we have a tendency to do that, but this is, what we're facing is something that we can't be our normal selves with. We need to find a way to come together and start making plans for this. So I hope that, I hope we don't satisfice here. I hope that we, actually do something.
Christy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank Mary and Vince and the whole Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee. I think this is something that select board as a whole has been looking for as guidance. And you guys have really stepped in and done a lot of work with the advisory committee. So I do think that this is something that's in line with our strategic plan and environmental leadership. And I want to move forward with a recommendation. I just think that we should have some of the few details ironed out with Chuck and make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page and agreement. So I think, as Don mentioned, going back and just ironing out a couple of those things. And then I think this is a really good thing to have as a placeholder while we're waiting for that report. And as Matt said, I don't want to stand around and not do anything, but I do think that we should just clear up a few of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. I do have Rick Atherton in the audience, or as an attendee. Rick? Oh, you've got Deanne's picture.
I clicked on. Why am I having Deanne's picture? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. Hi, Dawn. Just call me Deanne. I wanted to make a comment because I've been to several Conservation Commission meetings, and I've seen the presentation about the marine building, which was your opening remark to this conversation tonight. And it seemed clear to me that the alternatives presentation required by the commission was virtually non-existent. And I think in light of what I would call not conflicting necessarily, but a lot of conversation this evening about the importance of sea level rise, storm surge, and the location of this building, the Board of Selectmen would be wise to reconvene, hold a public hearing on the matter, and take public comment on it. The viewscape along Washington Avenue alone has been purchased slowly but steadily by the land bank. I think the building has an opportunity to go across the street. To be frank, I've talked to a number of people who I think are sympathetic but are reluctant to challenge the deputy chief and harbor master's desire to have the building where it's currently proposed. But I think a bigger community discussion is necessary before the board proceeds. Thank you.
Melissa?
Thank you, Don. And I just want to echo Christy's comments. I want to thank Mary and Vince and the advisory committee for what is likely a lot of work that went into this report. And I also want to thank Chuck for your review of it and your comments. I'm really confident that a couple more meetings can bring us back a recommendation that feels good all around. I think it's clear based on those strategic planning goals that this board is really committed to coastal resiliency and environmental stewardship. It's just making sure we have a recommendation that we feel confident in the planning going forward. So thank you for the hard work to date. I think there's a little bit of light lifting left, hopefully, and we can get this back on the agenda soon to approve your recommendation.
Thank you. So I think that we'll just table this, put it on one of the next couple of agendas, just have you guys talk, Vince and Chuck and Mary and the board, and just iron out all of the details in the recommendation to make sure everybody's comfortable. Okay. Oh, Vince, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next scheduled Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee meeting is on August 11th. So unless...
how can we put it on the agenda immediately following that?
Unless the chair had any other options. Sorry, that's...
Oh, Mary?
I think that we will discuss with Chuck what his schedule is and availability, and with the committee, and see what our best option is. I know that Vince has some vacation time coming up as well, so I want to make sure that we're able to get together sooner rather than later.
Okay, very good, Mary. So just be in touch, and we'll get it on the agenda as soon as you're ready.
Yep, thank you for your consideration this evening.
For all of your input and all of your work, and we're moving in the right direction in a very complicated issue. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Town manager's report. Oh, Matt, did you have something? Okay.
I was saying goodbye, Chuck.
Oh. Libby?
Okay. So I have one item here, and this could take a couple of minutes, but I don't want to rush through it, as I had mentioned to the chair and vice chair earlier today. I'm going to review some recommendations, some recognitions of a variety of people involved in the COVID-19 global pandemic. Many of the people that I'm going to make note of have worked solidly through the initial weeks and months of this pandemic, and many of them have taken very little, if any, time off since at least March 13th, when the Emergency Operations Center of the town was initiated. For weeks, numerous people worked 7 days a week. So I'm going to do this alphabetically by department, and then I have a few more sort of like honorable mentions to make. First off, the airport. Airport manager Tom Rafter. While the airport wasn't really part of the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, Tom was available and helpful at all times and provided pertinent information whenever we needed it. And an honorable mention for the airport goes to Assistant Town Manager Noah Carberg. Noah provided us information practically instantaneously, and it was always reliable and detailed. Culture and Tourism. The Culture and Tourism Director, Janet Schulte. Janet helped head up the Economic Recovery Task Force that was formed within about a month of the state emergency declaration and worked to get the recommendations coordinated for implementation wherever possible. Janet never hesitated to assist in any way she could and often had excellent suggestions. Finance Department. Director of Municipal Finance, Brian Turbett. Brian was always available for questions, promptly provided the information we needed for numerous financial questions, requests, keeping his department functional. Brian was also instrumental in the coordination of actions necessary for the 2020 annual town meeting, and this was not a small task. Brian's staff kept things going as well, many of them working from home and coming into the office when they were able to. Fire Department, Fire Chief Stephen Murphy. Chief Murphy provided consistent support and advice throughout the first few weeks, daily and as requested through to the present with reopening activities. His knowledge of the various agency protocols proved helpful time and again. In addition to the safety of the public, he was constantly aware of the need to keep the firefighters and emergency medical personnel safe and quickly put protocols in place to do that. An honorable mention goes to Deputy Chief Bob Bates. He filled in as necessary and was always promptly available when needed. Fire admin staff members, Kai Hodge and Linda McDonald, came in and worked to serve the public. And of course, the firefighters themselves continued doing their jobs without interruption. The Harbor Master. Sheila Lucy. Against all odds, Sheila and her staff were able to get the town pier open on schedule, plus the COVID beach management plan put together, including the necessary safety modifications to the lifeguard program, all of which in and of themselves were significant efforts, while concurrently managing the usual activities to prepare the harbor and other waterfront facilities for the summer. Health and Human Services. The Human Services Director, Taylor Hilst. Taylor pitched in from day one with offers to help in any way she could, and her contributions were extremely valuable for those in need of various types of assistance, including childcare, food, business, and unemployment, in terms of providing contact information for those things. Plus, there was meals coordination with the Sandbar and Or the Whale and Island Kitchen, all of whom helped provide among them all, over 4,000 hot meals to the island senior population, as well as a student lunch program, which was quickly set up and accessible. So thank you to those groups as well. The Chicken Box, with Taylor's coordination assistance, provided supplies for people in need. So thanks to them as well. And all of these groups obviously were struggling at the same time with not being open. Our Public Health Director, Roberto Santamaria. I don't think I can say enough about the efforts that Roberto has put in to keep our community safe. His dedication has been incredible. He was often the last to leave the EOC every day, for weeks, 7 days a week. He was constantly on the phone, responding to emails, conferencing with public health and other officials, answering our questions and those that were coming in, as well as looking ahead to getting restaurants up and running as quickly as possible once allowed. He was extremely helpful with advice as to getting the town's office safety protocols in place. Roberto also took a lot of unwarranted abuse during the initial weeks, but he took it in stride and did not let it get in his way. Honorable mentions for the health department go to health department staffers Ann Barrett, Artel Crowley, Kathy LaFave, John Hedden, and our COVID educators, Sky Flegg, Megan Rupp, and Madison Humphrey. All of these people have worked and are working very hard to keep our community safe. Human resources. Our HR director, Amanda Perry, and her staff. Amanda's communications to our employees was outstanding. There were videos, emails, newsletters, conference calls, personal assistance to any employee who needed it. She was consistently available and continued working on collective bargaining and other HR activities throughout the pandemic and has continued to do that. Staff members that have helped her are Michelle Malavase, Theodora Stockett, and Morgan Smith-Jones. Thank you to all of them as well. Information technology, our Chief Technology Officer, Karen McGonigal, and her staff. Karen stepped up immediately to help get us online with Zoom. She was readily available day or night for immediate assistance. She and her staff were also standing by to assist with getting employees set up with remote connections as needed, and in some cases, equipment that was needed. Staff members with honorable mentions are Patrick McGloin, Mike Alvarez, Enoch Sauer, Molly Strauss, and Linda Rhodes. Thank you to all of them. Nantucket Cottage Hospital. Although they are not a town agency, President and CEO Gary Shaw has been an amazing partner during this event. His assistance and knowledge of what to do during a pandemic brought a sense of urgency to our situation that probably saved Nantucket from a much worse scenario. He was available 24/7 and seemingly never slept. He kept us on our toes and pitched in immeasurably on numerous phone calls. It is largely because of Gary that we got onto the track that we did, with the importance of precautions and safety measures such as masks, social distancing, and sanitizing. Gary's "let's do this" attitude provided a calm but serious presence that served us well. Honorable mentions at the hospital go to Dr. Diane Pearl, Public Information Officer Jason Graziaday, Nancy Pittman, Elizabeth Harris, and Chris Glowacki. All of those people were invaluable with their information, assistance, suggestions, cooperation, and support. The contact tracing program is largely under the administration and oversight of Elizabeth Harris, and it's a critical operation. We could not have been as successful as we have been without the hospital. Natural Resources, Jeff Carlson, Natural Resources Director. Jeff ensured that the shellfish propagation facility was kept operational with no break in service, as well as NRD operations and CONCOM meetings getting restarted as quickly as they could be, with help from Joanne Dodd. An honorable mention goes to all the NRD staff members who pitched in without complaint or hesitation to keep the propagation facility going, including Tara Riley, Joe Manella, Leah Cabral, and Emily Whitaker. They cheerfully maintained their social media presence throughout. Our Island Home, the Director of Nursing, Heather Francis. Thanks largely to Heather's leadership, the Island Home remains free from any COVID cases. This took a significant effort and a lot of focus and coordination, not to mention the stress factor, which is not to be underestimated. An honorable mention goes to Tina Crane and all of the Island Home staff members who went above and beyond with their dedication to keep Island Home residents safe. Plus, Director of Planning Andrew Vorse and his staff were available for advice, preparing and reviewing orders, and compliance monitoring, all of which was critical throughout the initial phases of the pandemic. They also kept the Plus office responsive to public needs and requests. Honorable mention goes to the Deputy Director of Planning, Leslie Snell, Building Commissioner Paul Murphy, Local Inspector Jim Barry, and all the other Plus inspectors and staff. The Police Department, Chief Pittman, Bill Pittman. Another person who I don't think I can say enough about during those initial weeks. Bill very quickly recognized the need to establish the EOC and ensured that the proper staff were assigned to it and initiated it before the state declared a state of emergency. He was on top of all COVID-related response calls, the need for accurate documentation and requests for assistance, and had good ideas about communications. If it weren't for Bill Pittman, I'm not sure our initial reaction would have been as robust as it was. He kept us going day after day. after day and day. His number one priority was to protect our community and our police officers. Honorable mentions go to Deputy Chief Charles Gibson, Public Safety IT Manager Artis Gary, who quickly set up the necessary technology for the EOC and kept it going reliably throughout the initial weeks. Also, the various police officers who answered the dedicated COVID line, including Sergeants Dan Mack and Dan Furtado and others. They did this without complaint and were very good at identifying the questions and issues we needed to address through social media. And of course, all of our police officers and dispatchers who work to keep public safety at the forefront. Emergency Manager Brendan Coakley. Brendan has been phenomenal throughout the pandemic. He immediately set up the necessary templates for future reimbursement paperwork, which are voluminous, and promptly began tracking the necessary information. He constantly checked in with the officers as to questions that were coming in, and he helped develop accurate responses. He reviewed state orders and information and anticipated problems often before we did and was already working on solving them. Perhaps most importantly, Brendan made us laugh almost every day and made sure that our space was properly sanitized every day. Brendan was in the EOC before anyone else and often left well into the evening. Licensing Coordinator Amy Baxter. Amy has worked above and beyond to get restaurants open and communications out consistently and timely. She led the reopening effort with a think outside the box mentality and has been quick to jump in to help restaurants navigate ways to open as best they can. She has also worked to get specific summer events underway, including the Dreamlands drive-in movie program. Amy has taken phone calls, texts, and emails at all hours of the day and night and worked tirelessly on behalf of island businesses. Public Works. DPW Director Rob McNeil. While the DPW was limited at the beginning, the department was practically begging to be let loose to get at all manner of tasks while cars and people were not out on the roads. They had to be reined in a bit for COVID safety reasons, and once allowed to get fully back to work, immediately attacked the projects that had to be halted and worked toward getting the town ready for the summer. All while still behind the curve with a staffing shortage, they are cheerfully doing their best. Honorable mentions at DPW go to Ray Sylvia for getting signage in place as quickly as possible and replacing it promptly when needed. Also, our facilities staff, Mark Voigt, this facilities manager, Paul Berard, Aaron Kane, Roy Thomas, Donald Whitaker, Ian Lewis, and Ken Apthorpe. They helped get numerous office and building safety measures installed, and they were very cheerful about it as well. The Registry of Deeds. Registered Jen Ferreira, without complaint and largely on her own initiative, simply set up systems to serve the public and customers remotely and effectively with no complaints. The school. Superintendent Michael Kozort and now Beth Hallett and former high school principal John Bucky kept us advised and updated as to what was happening with the school, including graduation plans. And a big thank you to John Bucky and his staff for how the graduation ended up, and providing any assistance for the annual town election and the annual town meeting. Honorable mention to the school facilities director, Diane O'Neill, for being instrumental in making the election and the annual town meeting successes. No pushback whatsoever, just how can I help? She got that from you, Jason, I know. The select board. Thank you to the board for its diligence in keeping COVID issues at the forefront of weekly discussions and examining all areas of keeping the public and employees safe, especially to the chair, Dawn Hill Holgate, who is and was a member of the Emergency Operations Center. Dawn was always readily available for meetings and conveying information to the other board members as needed, and was always willing to do a PSA and or talk to the media, all of which she did in an articulate, clear, and calm manner. Thank you, Dawn. The sewer department. Sewer Director David Gray was immediately responsive to anything any department needed and kept the sewer system functioning, including the latest problem with masks being flushed into the system, and keeping up with non-COVID related sewer projects simultaneously. David's provision of PPE and other safety supplies to various departments was greatly appreciated. Honorable mention to the sewer staff members, including the admin staff, who kept the sewer department properly functioning throughout. Town administration, assistant town managers, Greg Tivnan and Rachel Day. Greg's role as public information officer, PIO, and working on public outreach was constant. He was available day or night to help with outreach and internal and external communications and ways in which we could be more and ways in which we could more effectively operate during the first few weeks of the pandemic. And side thank you again to Greg for the Streets and Shared Spaces grant. He put that together in like 5 minutes and we actually got money out of it. Rachel Day, in addition to constant oversight and communications with Island Home, which helped keep the facility free of COVID to date, Rachel handled much of the direct communication with certain departments, not only with the day-to-day issues, but COVID related. Both Greg and Rachel were always coming up with ideas to get out information and address a host of issues, many of which were put into place and eliminated problems before they became problems. Our office staff in town admin, Erica Mooney, Katie Cabral, and Maureen Coleman. It is largely because of Erica that we were able to very quickly get online with Select Board and Board of Health meetings. This was a full-time job on its own, and she concurrently maintained communication with other boards, committees, and commissions and staff with respect to public meetings going online and ensuring compliance with open meeting law requirements and keeping us going with day-to-day issues as they arose in a very orderly manner. Katie and Maureen kept our bills paid, our public records requests processed, phone calls and emails answered so that we could focus on the COVID response with as little distraction as possible. Our public outreach coordinator, Florencia Rulo. Florencia kept our website current and as accurate as possible and provided translation services and was available 24/7 to post the most current information possible. There was and is a lot of information to sort through and update daily. Our housing specialist, Tucker Holland. Tucker arranged for the housing that was necessary for the National Guard staff that was assigned here early on, and also the necessary additional lifeguard housing that was needed for this summer. This would have been much more difficult without Tucker securing it, arranging it, and just handling it. Town Clerk's Office. The Town Clerk, Nancy Holmes, and her staff continued serving the public remotely and seamlessly very quickly. Nancy very ably led the organization of the town election and the town meeting, both of which were pulled off with no issues, which is a major credit to Nancy and her staff and school facilities. A huge amount of effort went into those events. Honorable mention goes to the Assistant Town Clerk, Laura Ramo, and Gail Holgate. Wanacommet Water. Water Department Director Mark Willett was always available for questions, assistance, and kept our water supply safe and operational throughout the pandemic. In addition to the accommodations that I've just listed, I would like to mention a number of other groups who have provided critical services or supplies to keep our community going and or informed, specifically during the early weeks of the pandemic. NCTV, ACT.net and the INM, the Chamber of Commerce, and regular assistance and communication provided by Christy Ferrantella, Stop and Shop, Highline, Steamship Authority. Cisco Brewers provided hand sanitizer to a number of departments, which was very important early on. Shepley Products, Island Kitchen, the Chicken Box, Sandbar and or the Whale, the Nantucket Civic League, the Community Foundation of Nantucket, and even though they are paid for by the town, our cleaners, Overseas Cleaning and Sarah B. Cleaning, spent a lot of time early on sanitizing and cleaning and getting offices ready for people to get back into. I hope to God I did not forget anybody in this. And if I did, I'm very sorry, and I will recognize you at a later time.
You forgot the most important person, is the town manager, who probably faced one of the probably the largest challenge that you've had to face in your entire tenure. And
I would say
I put in 7 days a week, very long days, and we definitely have to recognize you.
Thank you. And thank you all very much.
Jason?
Yeah, thank you, Libby, for throwing out that gratitude and appreciation. It's much deserved. I want to also throw out there a thank you to Roberto. There were many nights where he would leave the EOC and take my phone call and sit out in that parking lot and talk to me for well over an hour, many nights. It was very difficult to communicate when all this happened, and not being able to be in the EOC. And so I want to thank you, Roberto. Many nights you didn't go home when you could have, and thank you for calling me and taking the time. And many other people, but thank you.
Thank you, Jason.
Yes.
And thank you, Libby. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Roberta. Melissa?
I'm just so grateful to jump in at the very end of all of your very hard work, or maybe at the end, but in the middle of, at the end of the crisis and into the planning. So thank you all. And Libby, you did a great job. I was just reminded that in addition, and maybe this is with my school committee hat, but in addition to the leadership at the school, I'd like to thank all the teachers. I think they navigated a very, very difficult transition to online learning. And I think they're facing additional challenges as we plan to how to get our kids back to school safely. So big shout out to all of our teachers at both the public schools and the private schools on island.
Thank you for noting that, Melissa. I should also say something about our other appointed and elected volunteers of all of the school committee members who had these challenges of figuring this out in uncharted territory, and the Board of Health, who put in many, many hours of their volunteer time. And both chairs of both those committees were always in communication with me and very accessible. So, I mean, there's many people who've played a big part in this, and the entire Nantucket community. You know, we're, knock on wood, doing very well compared to other places, and hopefully we keep it up.
I did just remember one more group. The Nantucket Regional Transit Authority, NRTA, under the leadership of Paul O'Leary, they kept going. We kind of said, should you really keep going? Maybe you should stop. But they kept at it, and they're still running with no complaints. So thank you to Paula.
Thank you. We'll move on to the select board reports and comments. We have a continued discussion and update on our racial equity, race relations task force and community forum. I think that we will start with Brooke. Can I go to you?
Charity Grace is actually going to begin our presentation.
Charity Grace. How are you?
I'm well. How are you? Thank you all for having us tonight. I'm Charity Grace Mofson, and I am one of several community members here tonight representing Nantucket Equity Advocates. NEA is a grassroots coalition that had its first meeting in January of this year. That meeting was organized by Christy Ferrantella and Callan Duke. The group has been meeting regularly since March 2020, and obviously mostly done by Zoom since COVID. NEA's mission is to create a sustainable movement to demand and support community action in order to break down systems of structural racism on Nantucket, so the systems of power become truly representative of all members of the community. So the founding members of NEA are Jason Bridges, Callan Duke, Christy Ferrantella, Lily Kovacevic, Brooke Moore, Mo Moore, Maria Partita, Marita Scarlett, Theron Singleton, Carla Zenas, and myself, Charity Grace. We had been developing a plan to begin a series of self-implemented interviews and focus groups to assess the racial climate on Nantucket and to begin the work of advocating for change. This is very important for our community. As you all know, as you all have been talking about for the previous weeks here, this is something that is very important to a lot of members of our community. The elevated level of national and international attention to the deaths of Black people at the hands of police, the Black Lives Matter movement, and systemic racism being brought to the forefront of our everyday conversations. More people than at least I have been aware of being interested in this, having these sort of conversations. At least in my lifetime, this is the most that I've seen people really be paying attention. So with all of this, we've decided to accelerate our coalition's timeline for action. In order to respond to this moment in history, we recognize the need to bring professionals to Nantucket to help us plan and execute this work. We're in the process of establishing a fund at the Community Foundation for Nantucket so we can accept donations. Our fund advisory board is going to be made up of Mo Moore and myself. And our co-secretaries for NEA are Theron Singleton and Marita Scarlett. And our treasurer is Brooke Moore. At this time, I am going to pass it over to some of my other team members.
Thank you. Brooke?
Hi, I am Brooke Moore and a proud member of NEA. And what we have decided to do, instead of doing the work ourselves, in order to make it more expedited and professionally managed, we are in the process of engaging a firm called All Aces Inc., which is a racial equity firm that operates out of Boston. The founder of All Aces Inc. is Dr. Atia Martin, and I met her this summer or last September at the Nantucket Project. She facilitated some meetings of a group of Nantucket Project attendees that I was part of called the Keepers of the Common. And she's a remarkable woman who's been doing racial equity work for years. The language she uses, the frame she talks about this work is amazing. And I'm so proud we have the connection with All Aces. And we are in the process of negotiating a contract with them that will be funded through donations to our Community Foundation Fund. Those steps will include a community survey to start, the purpose of which is to build a better understanding of the lived experience of Nantucketers around the issues of racism and inequity, and to identify specific topics for deeper engagement and conversation. Then we plan to use the information from the survey for them to plan and execute focus groups and community conversations on topics identified by the survey. And then ultimately to provide a summary of this work, which will help determine the next steps that NEA and the community can take to achieve our stated mission that Charity Grace shared with you in her presentation. So we're very excited about finalizing those plans and being able to announce them in short order with the community. And then I'm going to pass it along to Marita, who's going to talk a little bit about how we look forward to working in the community.
Thank you, Marita. You're muted.
I've had an absolutely silent meeting the entire time. And of course, the minute the camera turns on, the dogs will bark because somebody pulled in the driveway, and Malcolm makes his regular Zoom bomb. So that takes me to my conversation about our role in NEA, with NEA, as sort of a community conduit. One of the things we feel really strongly about, and in our conversations with each other and with other members of the community, is that one of the sort of glaring issues with racial equity is a lack of a space to talk about issues of discrimination and racism, and people of color within the community feeling like they don't have a voice, or that their voice can't be heard or received by the systems of power. So as a group, we have a lot of diverse representation, not just racially, but also within our roles in the community. We have business owners, we have educators, we have town employees, we have people in hospitality. And so our hope is that within our group of 12 and potentially additional members, we can really make sure that the voices of the people that need to be heard are brought to the table. And so we'd like to present ourselves to the community as people that are welcoming to conversations, and have, quite frankly, practiced difficult conversations among ourselves quite a lot between March and now. So that's sort of what I see as our role, in addition to the formal work we're doing, also that grassroots work, as far as just being a face you can see in the community, and someone you could talk to who could bring your voice to the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
My turn. My name is Theron Singleton, and what I wanted to talk to you guys tonight about is why I decided to join this group. I'm very honored and privileged to be a part of this group. My family came to Nantucket in the 20s, and the things were very different then. My grandparents were not allowed to be married in the Catholic Church because people of color got married in the rectory back then. And the time that I've been here, I've experienced racism personally and professionally, so in both arenas. And I'm also aware of people in our community who have experienced racism and that they have felt like they have no voice and nowhere to go and no one to talk to. And, for a period of time, so this June was my 27th year teaching on Nantucket. And there was a long period of time when I was the only Black woman teacher in the whole district, in the entire district. We need to give our kids positive role models and examples. So I'm looking forward to being a part of this group, to just be a voice and to build racial equity on Nantucket. It's long overdue and we need it. So thank you.
And I'd like to finish our, is Mo raising his hand? Mo Moore is also part of our group, and he wasn't in time to get a panelist invitation. I don't know, does anyone see whether he's raising his hand?
But he does not have his hand up.
Okay, I just wanted to give him a shout out and an opportunity to do so. I'd like to wrap up and say that NEA is really looking forward to collaborating with the town, and we are very pleased with the commitment that the select board and town administration has made to doing this work within the government. And we look forward to collaborating with you all in following up on your commitment to affecting systemic change in our community. And I'd like to cheekily say to you that we will also be the people who will be poking you and prodding you to continue to keep up the good work and continue the movement forward. And we're hoping that the work we're doing with All Aces will be informative to the process that Rachel is undertaking in terms of RFP and your decision to hire a diversity and equity officer for the town. And we really, when we started this, we had no way to imagine. We thought we were going to be stepping into a space where we were going to be starting from ground zero with town administration and town government. And the direction that you have taken is so heartening. In some ways, we felt like we were playing catch up to you guys in the last few weeks in order to get ready to bring ourselves out into the public space. So we're really excited about this, and it's critical to our community and being the community that I hope we will be, and that the rest of our group hopes we will be going forward. So thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Marita?
Just one more plug in regards to sort of everything we've talked about, the work with All Aces and the Community Foundation for Nantucket. We learned today that you have to actually have money to open we need money, basically. So we need, in order for the Community Foundation of Nantucket to be able to support our cause, we need to have a fund that's already been started. And so for us to be able to access it, and Brooke, please chime in if I'm getting this wrong, we need to have, I believe, $10,000 to start being able to access the fund. And once we have that funding, we have plans to, as Brooke mentioned, contract with All Aces to begin the more formal part of our work within the community. So that being said, we are hoping that donations will start to come in earmarked for Nantucket Equity Advocates through the Community Foundation for Nantucket. I'm not that familiar with that procedure yet. So if I'm misspeaking on that, Brooke, please correct me.
So we are literally in the process of setting up that fund. And so anyone who is interested in making a donation, I would appreciate them reaching out to me and we'll sort out the details.
Charity?
I just wanted to thank you all again for having us here, and for also being committed to doing this work as we move forward. So thank you.
Thank you all for taking the initiative to do this. And what we absolutely need is the community input and people to feel like there's a safe space for them to give the input and tell their stories and tell us how we can improve. And I think that it will be a great partnership. And I'm looking forward to it. And I will say just the next piece is that we are ready to post the job description and advertise it to start looking for candidates. Brooke, did you want to say something else?
I just wanted to share with all of the viewers out there that we are intending, we do meet on a weekly basis, and we are in fairly short order, we're probably going to be opening up those Zoom meetings to the public as opportunities for conversation and learning, and you'll hear more about that from us in the coming weeks.
Melissa?
Thank you so much, Dawn, and thank you to you all. I feel very proud to know each of you, and I'm very grateful for your community organization skills coming together in this way. I'm just over the moon proud of each of you and all of you collectively. How do people reach a Nantucket Equity Advocates? And I'm just thinking, Brooke, you said to reach out to you if they want to make a gift, but is there a direct way that we can send people to NEA at this moment, since we probably have a good public audience right now? And Dawn, with your permission, it would be wonderful to have this group periodically report to us. We've got 2 select board members who are part of the group. Even as part of some committee report outs, would be wonderful to keep our finger on the pulse of the work. Thank you.
So we do have an email address. It's nantucketequityadvocates@gmail.com.
Thank you. That's valuable information. Thank you all for being here. Does anybody have anything else on this subject tonight? Hearing none, we have our final agenda item is committee reports. Christy, you've always got something for me.
Well, it's not a committee report, but public information that the clean team is starting back up this Saturday. So we can all help clean up Milestone Road this Saturday.
Thank you. Jason?
Well, first off, my face hurts from smiling and seeing Brooke and Charity Grace and Rita and Theron here tonight. So thank you guys for being here. I'm just so, like Melissa said, over the moon. This is some good stuff happening, and I'm going to do the work. It's not going to be easy, but it's happening. Select board comments. I really would like to either put on the agenda or talk to traffic safety and really think about making Pleasant Street one way. I think the more and more I talk to people, restaurateurs, people who are attending restaurants and walking downtown, are really warming up to some of these ideas of closing down streets and making it more walkable. And being the chair of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee, which we haven't met since COVID started, but we would like to start up soon. It's a great time to explore things like closing some portion of Pleasant Street to one way and making it walkable and bikeable for families. And maybe the fall, I don't think we could have done it. We didn't have enough time to really get it done this summer. Maybe the fall is the time to do that. I've mentioned it to people and some homeowners on Pleasant, from kind of outdoor power to Five Corners. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback. So I just want to throw it out there. Maybe either get on the agenda, or Libby, you and I can talk offline, or anybody else. I know we can't really discuss it. It's not on the agenda, but having access to that road and making it more walkable could be, and bikeable for families and everyone, could be a pretty cool thing. Thanks.
Anybody else have anything tonight? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
you. All those in favor by roll call, Christy Ferrantella.
Aye.
Matt Fee. Matt, I think you said aye.
Aye.
Jason Bridges.
Aye.
Melissa Murphy.
Aye.
Tom Holgate, aye. Unanimous. I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone for participating.